I'm James Constable, and you're listening to the James Constable Podcast, powered by Get Radio.
Well, hello and welcome once again to the James Constable Podcast. This is episode 6. Can't believe we've made it to episode 6. We're back here at the White House with Tap Social Movement, just in Oxford, recording. Big thank you to them for letting us take over, which is now what we do. We take over somewhere to record the podcast. This episode, we're going to be dealing with the twilight of your career at Oxford United, which, like much has happened in the last 5 episodes, has had lots of ups and lots of downs. And it's going to be a great, great listen. Really, really looking forward to this one. Let's go back to 2012, 2013 season, which, and it's awful. We've got these notes in front of us here that you'll see on the video and what have you. Teddy's written out my notes for me. And in big sort of like inverted commas, it's just gone nothing year.
I hasten to add, this is a direct quote from James. This is not my doing.
So yeah, let's go from leaving sort of captaincy and the Swindon issues that we had from the last episode. Let's go into nothing year. But sort of just elaborate on that a little bit more for that season, which was not a bad season for Oxford United, all told.
No, I think, like I say, where we finished, I think we finished 8th in the league and just outside the playoffs. And you look at it and you think, oh, it's an all right season. But actually, we went off to America for pre-season, which is not like any pre-season I've ever had at any club anywhere. It was had a lot of similarities from a stag do. It was unbelievable. Literally one of the best pre-seasons. I think it's sort of like one of those sort of stories you hear all the time. That pre-season was pretty good. Like we were obviously in America. We got to go out. We were drinking, like obviously at the place we were staying, and the Seacoast, the team that were putting us up, were basically sort of picking up the bill for everything. So it was a mad sort of week, really. We played some games over there. We had a sort of good time. Obviously, team bonding wise, it was great. We got to get to know everyone a little bit better. But yeah, came back and started the season okay, and then we went on a sort of terrible run of games that put us, at that point, probably sort of half looking over our shoulders as to where that season was going to go.
It's weird. I always wanted to know, but obviously football players are allowed to drink. They're allowed to kind of eat what they want.
Yeah.
Obviously, professionals hire in chefs. Some players choose not to drink and what have you. In terms of a pre-season, in terms of training, are there people that are turning up hungover and going, I'm not going to make it through this? What is the, like you said, it was like a stag do.
Yeah.
I'm really going on from my own experience of if I have a drink, I don't want to get out of bed, let alone run around a football field for 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours.
Well, that was our second tour, as it were, of America. So we'd been the year before, and then this was like our second. So I think the lads knew what to expect. Like we were probably like briefed a little bit on like not the same as last year, not too much. But I'd say we were obviously playing American sort of college teams, things like that. So it wasn't probably the best standard of game. Yeah. So it was, like I said, there was definitely players turning up. I remember sort of Mickey and Chris and those guys coming down. Sort of most mornings, Mickey was sort of famous for, he'd just come down literally soaking wet hair. He'd literally just got out of the shower, kit on, straight down, and you could just tell that looking at their faces, we knew they'd been out. And like obviously some of the lads we were given obviously times we could go out. Other times I think we went to watch like Man United play at the Fenway baseball stadium.
Yeah, yeah.
And like there was obviously things we did through that stuff that wasn't all around drinking. But like I said, I'd never, obviously apart from the previous year we went to America, like been at that level of, like I say, there were lads, not naming names, that were out like literally more nights than we would.
Yeah.
I love how he's making it sound like it's nothing to do with him. He was
Yeah,
on his
yeah.
best behaviour.
Other people.
I would say out of the group, like it wasn't something that I was probably big on. Like I'd go out when we'd go out, obviously through the season, sort of Christmas dues, but there'd be like players that were going out a couple of nights a week, and like I say, it was never really my. I say I'd socialise, but going out to that level, it wasn't something I always sort of did too much. But like I say, over there, there were lads out near enough sort of every night we were over there. So looking back now, you look at the season, the start, we did start all right, sort of two wins out of the first 3 or something, and then I think we went 8 or 9 without a win, and we were sort of 17th, 18th in the league at that point.
So again, that season is it feels like you're still being touted to go up. You're still one of the sort of stronger teams. You've been in the league. You know, where are you kind of? Where's the benchmark being set for that season going into it again? Are you going, playoffs a minimum?
I think every season, like I say, every season I was there, I always felt that pressure that the fans and the players and the staff, chairman, everybody wanted us to be there or thereabouts. I think obviously the first season it was like, well, we'll see what happens back in the Football League. But then after that, I think when we realised there's not a great deal of difference, obviously team-wise between the conference and League Two, but in terms of putting runs together, you put 4 or 5 games together, you're in the playoffs, you sort of lose a couple, you're looking at relegation. So I think we realised there wasn't a great deal in the league and we were more than capable of challenging every year I was there, basically. But I think this season, like I say, there'd been sort of players come in and like I say, obviously the change in chairman and things around that didn't probably, it was still the aim, but I think it was probably, again, looked upon maybe a season that might be a little bit of just see how it goes. But like I say, that it started really well, and then up to sort of the back end of sort of September, October, it was an awful run. We just couldn't seem to get out of that rut, and like I say, we were then in danger really of being sucked into a relegation battle.
Well, it's interesting there when we've talked to you before about all the stuff at Oxford. Off the pitch was something you guys weren't really concerned with. Like you've said about the reunion dinner, you didn't really realise how important that playoff game was for the club's future. Yeah. But you say there about how the change in chairman was something you felt. What was different this year about that?
I think probably just that relationship between the players and the chairman. I think before, obviously, we spoke about Calvin and what he meant to us as players, but the football club, and then we've gone from that. We've gone to a guy that, like I say, was obviously his background was based in rugby, and like I say, maybe not the same understanding of Oxford and what the fans expected, what the players had sort of achieved through that time. It felt a little bit of sort of disconnect between us and the chairman, and like I say, the players and the chairman. So I think it was a strange season. Like I say, we'd see him around, and obviously, but I just think that relationship as before to then now it was different, and like I say, it just didn't always feel that we were all as one. It was like a little bit of disconnect there.
Do you think with Calvin there, the club felt, you sort of mentioned that sort of disconnect. There was a more of a togetherness, and it feels like a togetherness is really important. Maybe at sort of lower levels, because you can see everyone around. Your owners aren't a million miles away.
Yeah.
They're there on a day-to-day basis. You're seeing them; they're part of it. You get to know them on a personal level, all this kind of stuff. And having a change of chairman, like you say, that kind of upheaval, did it turn into more of a business more than a football club? Do you know what I mean by it?
Yeah, I think so. Like I say, I just didn't feel that same sort of like connection with Kelvin. And like I say, you knew, like obviously you'd see him around and you could chat to him, and it felt very much, like I say, a little bit of sort of shirt and ties, and Kelvin would be suit, shirt unbuttoned, and like I say, just more welcoming. And it was a little bit more like this guy was here. Obviously, he wasn't here to just make up the numbers. He was here to obviously turn the business profitable and make money and stuff like that. But I don't know, it didn't have that same feeling. And I think as a group, we would obviously, we'd still have to speak to him about bonuses. And I remember sort of meetings pre-season, we'd have to organise like FA Cup runs and League Cup, like what we wanted and appearances and all that. And it was always, I think with Calvin, he was a little bit more willing to sort of meet us halfway or try and sort of, as long as we were happy and like say he was happy, it would work. Whereas it was a little bit more, we'd feel like we'd have to sort of go back and forth constant to try and get anything arranged, and like I say, it just felt slightly different. Like things had changed from Calvin. Obviously, I think we were probably very fortunate to have him at the time, and maybe didn't always realise that until it changes and you've got someone different there that's sort of steering it all.
Sort of like your favourite teacher, isn't it, at school? That's why I relate it to. Yeah. And you kind of, when they go, they're like, oh, this one's worse.
He's really good.
Yeah, I really like
exactly.
it. So Ian Lennigan's come in. You mentioned to us that he had more of a rugby background, and he tried to sort of invoke that with all the players and with yourselves as well in a few scenarios that maybe didn't quite hit the mark, or maybe some of the players didn't quite get?
Yeah, again, infamous sort of pre-season trip we went up to Wigan Warriors, and we went up and watched them train and like see how they sort of worked, which was an eye-opener. Like I say, seeing these guys at absolute monsters in the gym, and it's like there's tables of like the weaklings who can't lift 200 odd kg, and I'm thinking like any of us would struggle, we would be in the bottom of this table. And just to see those guys and the way they work to us, it was like we sort of appreciated what they were doing, but didn't really see the connection between.
Yeah, it's a different sport
we're a
altogether.
football club, like we're there stood watching, and then I think they finished training, and then we got on their pitch and did a bit of football training. And it was just like
Cut up
there
to
was
shreds.
rugby posts with cones in front, and it was just all a little bit strange. And then we went off to this Marine camp for pre-season, which probably the worst thing I've ever done. It was horrendous. We were out at all hours. We were being woken up by sort of bangs on the door at 1 end. We didn't have watches. We didn't know what time, but it was pitch black. It was the middle of the night. It felt like we'd just dropped off, and they'd be in the rooms getting everybody up. Like you had like 30 seconds to get dressed. Outside, I remember one of the occasions we had to go down to this like river with the traffic cones, like get in, fully submerge in this river at, say, the middle of the night. Traffic cone, fill it with water, carry it back to these wheelie bins, and just like in teams, like quickest who could fill it up. And when it got to like so high, like it was almost there, they'd just kick it over, and you just have to keep going. And it was like you'd come in from that sort of shivering, have like 5 minutes to get into bed, just dropped off, whistles going again, whistles, loudest whistles you've ever heard, banging on the doors, up again, pushing minibuses up hills. Like it was just,
It's taking team building to the absolute extreme.
Yeah,
But
and like I
it's
say,
not rugby. It's that's rugby, isn't it?
Yeah.
That to me is a rugby. The connotations with the army and the follow
these
it. It's
Marines
not
were
football.
like, it felt like they were literally trying to break us. And it was like we had Ali Lane there and people on the sort of medical team that were like, I think from speaking to them after, I don't think they realised the level that we were going to be pushed. I think they thought, oh yeah, a bit of like fun, and they get them to do press ups and all this.
Yeah.
We were literally we got woke up, took into a room, all the lights off. There was like kids screaming. It was like torture music, that how they would try and get information out of people. And all of us were just like, and then they were tapping us, like putting things over our head and taking us into separate rooms.
It sounds like the sort of thing that would take a serious toll on players.
Literally, there's videos. I've got a video on my computer at home, and I think Ali and that were videoing it. But you just see like everyone's so tired, like literally at bed, struggling to keep your eyes open. Been up
And this
all
is
night.
amidst pre-season preparation.
This is like a pre-season sort of team building, but like I say, it was pushed to like the extremes of. I ended up in hospital. Like we got there the day. I think sort of around lunchtime. We'd been there like doing stuff all day, obviously up all night. We'd barely eaten. Came to like one of these things, like say we had sort of wrestling or things that we were doing on the mats, like wrestling each other, and literally it just got to a point where I was like blacking out. I couldn't see what's happening. So they've obviously took me, and I think it was Sam Long at the time, because he was only a young lad. We both ended up in sort of A&E, and they were like, I was hooked up to like ECGs and all this sort of stuff. Obviously all the team like left. That morning there's like obviously pictures and stuff of them like celebrating this end of this pre-season. There's me sort of in the hospital waiting
You miss
to be...
all the
Yeah, I was going to say, you've
Exactly.
never had a celebration.
I would have really looked forward to that one. That was literally the finish, because I think they had more stuff planned, and it was like, oh, we're only joking, that's it, you're finished. And everyone was like jumping around, hugging each other like they had made it, whereas like me and Longy are literally just sat in the hospital waiting to be sort of discharged, and then we had to come back. But it was one of those things that never really got mentioned, but if you speak to any of the guys there, it's like an infamous, like
Or mentally scarred.
the worst pre-season you could ever imagine for players. It was something I hope, like I say, I'm obviously not playing, but I hope no one has to go through that sort of thing ever again.
Well, I mean, all the drama wasn't really in the season. It was kind of
pre-season,
pre-season, wasn't it? Oh, wow. So, a massive change has happened to the club, and Calvin has moved on. We've heard that Ian Lenigan is in, and we kind of get to the start of a new season. Expectations still the same? I mean, in terms of, it wasn't a bad year, again, for yourself, top scorer for the 5th successive season for Oxford United. A decent, was it ninth finish, a ninth place finish, which, okay, just outside the playoffs.
Yeah.
Going into a new season, same sort of manifesto, same goal to get back into that playoff and do the same things again? Was it going into that season? Were there any rumblings of this was going to be a different season to last year in any way, shape, or form?
No, I think, like I say, that obviously players had come in and some had gone out, but I just felt like maybe it was obviously that the aims were still the same, but I think we started really well. And like say 3 games in, I think we were sort of 2 wins out of 3, and we were putting ourselves in a great position. And then I say, looking back, it's hard to sort of put your finger on what, but then sort of going 7-8 games without a win, you're literally almost a third way through the season, and we're, I think, 18th, 19th in the league, and you can't sort of explain why it can go from that to that.
It's unlike all the other leagues. Like you look at the Premier League, the Championship, you don't see this fluctuation. That season, you have periods where you're absolutely dominating, top of the table, automatic promotion, but then you say there's about 2 or 3 runs where you go 5 games without a win.
Yeah.
It's mental. 46 games a season, anything can happen.
I think anything out of probably Premier League and sort of top-level Championship, everything else is just, it's absolutely
everyone
mad.
beats everyone.
Like League One and like say League Two, the Conference, you look at some of the results you get, and it's just, it's a phenomenal league. It's very rare you'll have a team that start the season well, plays well all season, get promoted. It's always, like I say, they have a dip and they lose a few, and then someone overtakes them, and then they've got to fight back. It is sort of like through a season, it's a sort of mission to be able to get that run together and keep that going, because it's very rare, because just the nature of the league, it is so difficult.
Yeah, it really, really is.
Well, in that season as well, though, we've not mentioned, you've got 2 things on your own mind as well. One, contract and that running out, but also a bit of a niggling injury as well.
Yeah, obviously the contract one was not so much at the early stages, but I know sort of the back end of that season, it was definitely on my mind, and I was I'd sort of put things out there that every time I spoke in the press, or that I was keen to stay. I was hoping that maybe it come the end of that season, and I'd obviously broke a bone in my foot, and I was getting injections for that, and it was putting me sort of out for a couple of weeks, and then I was playing a couple of weeks, but dealing with probably a fair bit of pain away from football. Like it was, I could play games, I could train, but then there was a lot of treatment involved, a lot of ice, a lot of, say, painkillers and things just to be able to get through the games. And I think that all comes back to coming back. I'd done it, and then I think normally now it's like 6 weeks or 8. I think I was 2-3 weeks, and I was back training and trying to sort of get through because of the nature. We didn't have big squads, but those 2 combined, it was a lot to sort of try and balance, really. Like say through a season that was already quite difficult, like say losing games and a lot of change, but then to try and deal with that and obviously the contract, it does sort of start taking its toll.
I wanted to ask, throughout your career, I think we mentioned in one of the first episodes that you weren't too bad in terms of injuries, but also there was that little mention, I think in episode 1, where you go into a game and you're not maybe 100% of the time. You may be 100% 3 or 4 games a season, putting words in your mouth, but not all the time, essentially. Can you just sort of describe to fans like ourselves going through an injury, I think people listening now have maybe broken something, a finger, whether it be a foot, the famous Rooney metatarsal, whatever it is, heard about it. But just take us through the sort of journey of having that type of injury and the sort of pain that you're going through. So in terms of, because what I'm envisaging is, as a football fan, if your name's on the starting lineup, you're fit and you're ready to play. Yeah. And that's not the case.
No, and I think that you've hit the nail on the head in terms of a lot of the time you'd get that injury, that it'd be assessed, you'd go and see a specialist, but you're always aware that like they want you back as quick as possible, no matter what that injury is. It's like if they say 6 weeks, and they'd be like, well, obviously with the right treatment and that, it may be 4. So it's always like they want you back as quick as possible. So obviously once I'd broken my bone and I think I'd missed a couple of weeks, it was always, I was in a boot and I was sort of trying to take as much weight off it, but it was, when are you back? Like, does it feel all right? Do you think you could come out and do a bit of running? Or so there's always that pressure to come back. So like say, we were speaking just off air, like obviously the lads that would take sort of tablets and painkillers and just to try and get you back out there as quick as you can. But really, all you're doing is masking that pain and trying to hide what you know. Really, is your body saying, "Look, you're not ready. You're not good to play." So there was many times that say players would be on the bench that the Peter Levens and Dean Smalleys, where they would have 2 days earlier were having sort of needles in their knee and liquid being taken out that was not a colour that you would imagine would be in a knee, but this is what that they were doing to be able to play and feel comfortable playing.
It must be a weird thing dealing with that as a player as well, because I know looking back through the history books and things, that 13-14 season, you miss a few games in September with this injury, and then you come off the bench at the end of the month, and Chris makes a big deal of it in the press, going, he's been really brave, he's really stepping up. And if you're feeling that it's awful, seeing something like that, though, must really make you feel like, no, I want to keep playing regardless of the pain, and then it's out there for fans to see. It must be a really weird thing to try and navigate.
Yeah, I think for players, I don't think I've ever sort of come across players that don't want to be out there. I think if they can get out there sooner and they can, like say, we were offered injections, we were, like say, getting strap-ins. There wasn't anyone saying, look, you know what, like I don't need the injection. I'll wait. I'll just sit it out for 6 weeks. It's like say if they can give you an injection, you can be back in 4. We were taking it because it was like, actually, we want to be back. Like we want to be out there. So. Obviously, it's not just me. There was, like, say, players that were going through, like Levs and those guys were going through a hell of a lot worse. Like, say, having sort of needles in their knee and this stuff being drained out. It's like, say, it's not something that should be happening to players. But again, that sort of determination, that desire to be out there, they were going through that. And like, say, there was lads that were getting strap-ins, doing whatever it took to be back out there. So I think it's just part and parcel. We've got so used to it. Through your sort of career, you just accept it as sort of the norm, and that's the way it is. But like I say, I know with the sort of painkillers and those types of things, that is something they're trying to sort of cut down because it is almost sort of out of control, really.
Yeah, no, it really is. Well, we've dealt with a couple of bits and bobs that happened at the start of that season, and I think we'll sort of come back to the injury and also the time left on your contract as well towards the end. But what we've not sort of mentioned, and dare I say, we've not made a big enough deal of, is the fact that you are a hell of a goal scorer. And come November, you get your 100th goal for the club, coming off the bench.
Away at Mansfield.
And, it feels like even going through this podcast and chatting to you, and I've mentioned before that you're very humble about this, but to get 100 goals for a club is an incredible milestone. And it feels like it's just sort of crept up on you. Did it feel like that? Did you, as a goal scorer, are you just kind of going, my job's to score goals and, oh, look, I've got quite a few now. Yeah. Was there kind of like that 100 goal in the distance, or did you know about it for a few games before? Yeah,
I think, like I say, I knew I was getting close to the 100, but obviously I knew the sort of target of the sort of top scorer, and I was desperate to sort of catch him and like say break the record. I think as a goal scorer you want to break the records, but I remember again, especially sort of that season, didn't start particularly great, and then like say picked up, and we started picking up results, and then got ourselves in a great position. Like say Christmas, I think that game that took us top of the league that day, and we came away with huge confidence. Like say me personally, to score 100 goal, I'd been left out of the team and probably a little bit angry. I felt like I was fit. I didn't need to be left out. And I know Dean and the guys were scoring goals, but I felt like even then that I was good enough to be playing. I didn't feel like at 28, 29 that I should be sat on the bench. I wanted to play, and I'm disappointed not to start, and then obviously got an injury and then managed to get on. I think it was just before half time, and then literally scored. And
talk about last minute. It's the 45th plus 8th minute.
Yeah. I'd only come on, I think, literally just before half time. So it was one of those where I think they were sort of umming and ahhing whether do we put them on, do we wait till half time? Yeah. And like I say, just chuck me on. But it was one of those, I hadn't really had too long to warm up. I think I'd just literally done a few sprints, put my pads on it and gone on. So, but yeah, to score, I think, like I say, I look back now and the pictures of me, like obviously it was ideal away at the away end with the fans there. And I think there's just a picture of me sort of pointing to them. I think that was my way of really thanking it. Yeah, it's great. I've scored 100 goals, but it's for them. Like they've supported me throughout the sort of 5.5 seasons I've been there. And I say looking back now, it was that me sort of half thinking that might be my last season? I don't know. Like it's strange, but it was a strange thing to do, to be able to sort of celebrate with them and point at them. And like say, I know I'd made a big deal about staying, and we were sort of halfway through the season now, and there was no mention of me staying. So maybe sort of subliminally, was I thinking that might have been my last season? I don't know, but it was obviously nice to be able to celebrate with them. And I just assumed even at November, with 5-6 months of the season left, I've only got sort of 6-7 goals to go to break the record. It wasn't something that I thought I wasn't going to be able to achieve.
Was there more emotion involved in that 100th goal? You said about you were lucky enough to be at an away end. I know we've spoken that it would have been even better to be at home.
Yeah.
But to be at the away end, is there an extra emotion involved with that 99 to 100?
Yeah, I think as well because of the I've been left out, and like there was I was angry. Like come on, I remember being like sort of the frustration, but I thought, you know what, like I wanted to go and score a hat-trick. I wanted to say, you know what, like this is why you shouldn't leave me out. And like I say, I'd obviously managed to get the goal, and it got us level on the night, and then we went on and won. But I remember even after just being frustrated that I was being left out, and it wasn't like say the first time. There was a few times throughout the season that I'd been sort of overlooked, and I felt like I was still one of the sort of top performers in training. I was doing everything right away from the club and looking after myself. Like I say, as you get older, it is a lot harder to do those things. I think when you're younger, you can afford to have a takeaway on a Saturday and things like that. But as you get, like say, 28, 29, it's not always something you can just do. It's a lot more work involved. I remember taking a lot more time to learn about what I should be eating, what I shouldn't, and just giving myself the best opportunity to play it as long as I could. But yeah, I definitely remember coming off, and there was obviously the press and different people there that I was speaking to, and I was obviously delighted I was scored. But like I say, deep down, I was sort of angry that I'd been left out and not given the sort of start that I felt I should have got.
Did you voice these concerns? Is that something that you can do as a footballer? And you can perform well in training. Can you go to Chris and go, why are you leaving me out? What's going on?
I think you could, like I personally probably in that year especially probably not so much, just because of our relationship at that point. But obviously other clubs I've been at, and sort of a famous one at Eastleigh, I remember speaking to Martin Allen and just saying, look, my contract was coming up there, and I said, like, obviously, what's the situation? Am I going to be offered a new deal? And sort of pitching it that, you know what, like I still feel fit, I can still do stuff. And I think that was on a Monday. We played on the Tuesday. I started. He pulled me off at half time and said, like, you've been telling me you should be getting a new deal, and that's the way you perform. And literally, I could have, if I was a bit younger, I think I would have just got up and had a tear up, because it was so disrespectful, because that wasn't the way the conversation went, and it wasn't how it came across. But in front of all the lads, to sort of say that I'd been knocking on his door asking for a new contract, which is something I've never really done. I've never been the one to be going and asking. It's always been, look, your contract's coming to an end, like, we'd love you to stay. So yeah, that was hard. But yeah, with Chris, I don't think that was sort of something I was sort of comfortable to go and sort of have that conversation with him. I think we'd got to a place where we could work together, we could be in the same environment, but maybe not so much knock on your door, like just sort of come and have a chat. It wasn't that sort of relationship we had anymore. So it was one of those, you just sort of had to bite your lip. And I did a lot of my talking, like say in the press and sort of on social media, to say that I'm desperate to stay, and hope that would somehow sort of get to the powers that be, and it would sort of come to fruition.
Do you think that's why you have a great relationship with the fans still? Because you were in front of them scoring goals, you were in front of them on social media, you were telling it how it is on the mediums that they all got. Do you think that has played a part from how you're respected now?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I remember even from the season before, people sort of messaging me and tagging in like the football club and saying, like, where's his new deal? Like, it was a big thing that I kept seeing. But it's one of those. Do you like it? Do you do you know what I mean? You don't want to reshare it.
Well, people really make a big thing out of it.
Retweet it
So and so did that.
Yeah,
they
exactly.
unfollowed that club.
It was one of those where I'd see it and I'd think, like, well, liking it's probably okay, because I'm not like doing anything too, but I'm not going to like reshare it or whatever, retweet it just in case they think like, well, that's me having another sort of nudge that I want a new deal. So it was a funny time, but I remember, like say, it was a big thing for the fans. They kept saying, look, obviously, hopefully you get that new deal. And like say, for me, I was just like, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, like, obviously frustration that I wasn't playing as often as I was like, but I felt like at every game that season I was sort of on trial almost. I had to, every game that I did get a start, or I did get because I think I still started a fair few that season, but I felt like every time I did, I needed to really sort of set a benchmark of what I could do.
Well, I feel like it's important to note that season, there are only 2 players in the squad who play more games than you, and one of them's Clarkey in goal, so obviously he's going to play loads, and the other player's a defender. Out of all the midfielders, all the forwards, you've got the most appearances, the most minutes. It's not even close.
Yeah.
Especially bearing in mind your injury as well at the start of that season.
Yeah, and I think that, like I say, that was down to probably there was games where maybe, like I say, it was if we'd played on Saturday and then we played like a Monday over Easter, or like there was probably times where I maybe shouldn't have been so desperate to play, but I like I say, I hated missing training, hated missing games. Like obviously I wanted to start. If I had to come on, it was one of those things you just had to do, but ideally I wanted to be playing, I wanted to be training. So there was obviously times that season maybe where I shouldn't have played, or I should took a step back. But like I say, it was that fear of probably what was coming and not wanting to leave, not wanting to be sort of like left on the bench, and then it's an easy one where he's only played 10 games, so we're not going to offer him a deal or whatever. But I just wanted to make sure that I was in and around it and showing what I could do, that hopefully they saw something to offer me a new deal.
Well, you mentioned games coming thick and fast, and they don't come any thicker and faster than the Christmas period and January. And January brought an interesting thing that happened. You can explain it, James, but my sort of question sort of leading up to is, did anyone see this coming?
Yeah, I think looking back, that there was whispers of obviously interest for Chris, which there always was. Like any job, like League 2, League 1, anyone that was ever, even like say throughout any season he was there, he was always linked because of the job he had done, and people got to know like his methods and how he was doing things, and like I say, even in the press, how he spoke about things, he was very open, honest about everything. So I think he was always linked, but then every season it got a little bit more sort of serious, and like I say, we were always kept informed of stuff, but I think these started to be not even discussed with the players, or we were picking it up through sort of social media and obviously Sky Sports, that he was linked with certain jobs. So I think we felt it was probably a matter of time before he was going to move on. I think he'd been there, and obviously I know that there was obviously he was good friends with Kelvin, and then Kelvin had left, and I don't know particularly how well Ian and Chris had been getting on, and it didn't, like I say, just didn't feel that same club unity that we had before. So I think that was probably a factor. But then, yeah, obviously I think he ended up walking away the end of January, which for the players was a big shock. Obviously we almost prepped ourselves for that at some point, but where we were and still sort of doing really well in the league, it was tough. We didn't know what that meant then sort of going forward.
Well, the thing that's crazy looking at it from a completely outside point of view is you've been properly in the promotion hunt this year, perhaps the closest you've been at any point since your return to league football, and you're 6th, you're in the playoff spots, and he makes the move to a team battling relegation. That must have really given you a real sense of uncertainty in not just the present with Oxford, but looking forward to the rest of the season and on from that.
I think that, yeah, again, that was, I think, the first time we've been outside the top 5, literally from the start of the season to that point. We like to say, come out the top 5, and I think from our point of view, we were thinking, well, we can carry this run on. Like at the time, you probably don't realise what effect he's having. You just assume, well, we're doing it. Like we're the players that are doing it. But actually, like that sort of, we didn't know really why he had left. Was it down to contracts? Was it like he'd asked for a new contract and they'd not backed him? Had he asked for money in the window and he hadn't been backed? Or we didn't really understand as to why the reasons you would leave at that point. Like say, to be top of the league or in the top 5 or 6 to then
everything about it is
for
bizarre, isn't it? It's the timing of it, the fact that it's going to a lesser team, you know, certainly, and almost following a chairman as well. Those are unique things, really, that have happened in football. And like Teddy said, you know, that uncertainty.
Well, you don't realise as well, looking back on it, that there's an amazing stat that you're the only team in the top 4 divisions to not have lost away from home since the start of the season. It's not until Chris leaves, and in February you lose your first away game. The only team out of all 92 to not have lost away. It's an unbelievable stat, and to walk away from that.
And like I say, it is for us. It was, we just didn't know what had happened. We realised there must have been something behind that. You don't just walk away from a team that sort of got every chance of getting in the playoffs and getting promotion to join a team in a relegation battle for nothing. There's obviously something behind it. But I remember obviously them saying, look, Mickey was going to sort of carry on as caretaker. Obviously, we still had Mel and we still had people there that could, like I say, player-wise, we had enough in there to stay where we were and fight it. So it didn't seem too much of an issue. But slowly over time, I think the club didn't exactly help Mickey. They put him in a position where he probably didn't know where his future lay. Was he going to be made full-time manager? Was he going to sit in for... Because it was a long time between that and
He was
Gary
in charge as caretaker for 2 months. We think of a caretaker boss being maybe weeks. 3 weeks. Yeah, but 12 games in 2 months, that's a proper little managerial stint.
Yeah, and like I say, the performances we were delivering weren't good enough, and we were slowly sort of slipping down that. I don't think we sort of came out of the top 8, but we went for a run of say 4, 5, 6 games without picking up a win. And I think for us, we were looking for somebody at the top to sort of make something happen and implement something or get us some sort of lift that we needed to get us back on track. But I felt the club probably just sort of took a little bit too long and really just caused that to get worse and worse. And like I say, in the end, I think they brought Gary Waddock in for the last 7, 8 games, but not a huge amount of time for him. But not obviously then it put Mickey in a situation where I think he didn't know whether he was going to be staying or whether he would have his own staff. And there was just a lot of unrest, I think, between everybody. And obviously you chuck into the mix, obviously contracts for most of the players now. You've got a new manager, so everyone out of contract. You've got like 2 months or a month to try and prove yourself to this guy, get to know him, get to know how he works. It just made for a sort of hellish last couple of months of the season.
I wanted to sort of draw comparisons to Mickey and yourself in terms of two much loved and in Mickey's case dearly missed.
Yeah.
Just shown at his memorial game, which was absolutely phenomenal. The outpouring of love and emotion that was there for a character, and my God, it's good to say that there are still characters around. I wanted to kind of draw that comparison that someone who lived and breathed Oxford United, who was, you've mentioned before on previous episodes, you could have a word with Mickey, and that's who you go to. He'd sort you out. He's on your side. He's vouching for you. Similarly with yourself, you're banging in goals, appearances, a club legend. Do you feel a little bit like the club could have served you both better in terms of maybe the hierarchy or maybe clarity under lots of things, with contracts, with decisions going forward, that they could have served you both better?
I think definitely with Mickey, I think as a group we felt sorry for him. Like I say, you sort of look across and for someone that would be in with us in the morning, take us for a session, like say come in, have something to eat, race off to the uni and take the uni players and just someone, and then you'd see him on social media in the evenings at sort of local clubs like under 8s, under 10s taking sessions, and it was like a guy that just lived and breathed football. But he had gone from, like say, being the go-to man, any issues you go to Mickey, to actually he's then dealing with all the stresses of that, press asking him about like the next manager, obviously speculation over his future. Is he staying? Is he going to be the manager? It's a lot to deal with, and I think as an assistant you have different roles in that, but then to be sort of thrust into that, and I just felt that he didn't get the backing, he didn't get the sort of like the level of sort of respect he deserved, really. Like I say, he'd obviously played for the club, been a legend, he'd worked with Chris, he'd been a big part of Wembley, a big part of being back in the Football League, and then he's sort of left to just sort of fight and defend, which obviously Mickey, you back him every day of the week. He is definitely a fighter, but I just felt like he was left a little bit to be sort of the guy there that tried to steer it, and he needed a bit more help.
You say about that, and press is such a big thing now. Even we talked about with the whole Swindon transfer saga, the press being huge in that. Ian Lenigan comes out and says, he's talking about the process, goes, we've had 72 applicants. And he's talking about that rather than the man who's in, who ultimately managed more games than Gary, who came in and only did 8 at the end. It must have been a weird thing as players, because you're getting those games are just totting up more and more and more. It's a sort of, you personally, where am I going to be? But where are we going even just in the next few weeks, not the season?
Like I say, we definitely felt that. And like I say, we were, it's like one of those things we were looking to the people above to say, look, like make a decision. Like we need somebody here. We need a big character. We needed a Chris, really. We needed someone that could say, look, forget all this. Like, this isn't for a long time. This is going to be a short period and it's all going to be all right. But we felt like we were sort of left a little bit out on our own. And like I say, then obviously Gary came in, and someone that we had known from other teams. I think he'd been an older shot and he'd been around the leagues. And like I say, we knew of him. He probably wasn't the sort of level of manager I was expecting the club, after taking all that time to sort of come to a decision. I was thinking I was going to have to be a sort of big name, or
he hadn't managed for 2 years,
a big character, and to go sort of down that route, it seemed a strange decision, really.
Yeah, so it really feels apparent that come January with Chris leaving, uncertainty is definitely a topic that keeps cropping up. The uncertainty of Mickey's situation, the uncertainty of a manager that Teddy says who hasn't managed for the best part of 2 years, who's come into a club who probably didn't have the respect straight away, which is understandable. Yeah. There feels like there was a big unraveling in the club that was happening. Wrong decisions had been made. Chris walking out. Why? Yeah. Not really knowing that. Describe the sort of atmosphere when Gary comes in, because you go on a wretched run. We always talk about new manager bounce and all this kind of stuff. It was the exact opposite.
The antithesis of that. 7 losses out of 8. It doesn't get much worse.
No, and I think sort of in defence to him, probably it was that was following on from the previous, but we were already too far into that run that, like I say, you see it. You can't just flick a switch and be like, right. You do see it with a new manager. Sometimes you might get a game or two, but then 9 times out of 10 they revert back to the form as to why they're in that position. But
out of the last 15, it's 11 losses. Yeah. So when you look at it like that, it's exactly as you say. It was building. Yeah,
it was building, and we just felt, like I say, it wasn't from lack of trying. It wasn't from lack of, like I say, he came in and tried to implement sort of different sessions and different sort of tactics, but like I say, once you're on that run, morale is, like I say, an all-time low. You've got obviously myself and other players that are out of contract. There's so much more than just, I think a lot of time fans just expect you to just like, we'll talk about contracts tomorrow, 90 minutes, focus on that. But it's in the back of your mind. You'd like say you don't want to get injured. If you get injured, you haven't got a club, you're not going to earn any money. There's a lot more involved that like say, you want that security. You want to know that, say you're playing for a club that want you to be there and they're going to look after you.
I'm going to use another sort of real world example for work, and I go back to work scenarios because I think a lot of people can relate to that. Is there that feeling around the club at this stage of the Sunday dread of going into work on Monday morning going, oh God, I can't face it, when you're on such a bad run, even though you're going out, you're trying to win. Of course you're trying. I never accuse anyone not of doing that, but you're on such a bad run. But there's that feeling of going dread almost. I
think, like say, for going in for training, it wasn't too bad. Like say, if we'd lost on a Saturday, there might be like a little bit of like, we're gonna have to watch the DVD, and it was always sort of made out to be like, the horror show, like get the popcorn ready, and like it was try to sort of lighten the mood. But I think we knew when you're seeing it back like that, black and white, you can see it in front of you. It's one of those things. I think in the end we tended to do it in groups, because we'd do it in like a whole squad, and we'd be watching it, and it'd be like we'd be conceding goals, and like midfielders and forwards are like sort of shaking their heads, and then it would cut to like us missing a chance, and then so it's very much you could make it as about we conceding loads of goals, or we're not scoring, but then it went like a lot more individual. So like clips of with us forwards, like what could we have done better, but I think with Gary, it was a little bit of like we needed to sort of come away from that and just like work hard, like try to sort of implement all the basics, like back to square one, clean slate. But I think it was the timing of, obviously, I think the middle of March, and everybody's getting them most teams, if you're not in the playoffs, you're not in and around it, you're sort of thinking about your holidays. But I just think it was the wrong time of year for someone to be coming in. And he inherited, like, say, a team of people that was some out of contract, some that we just have to make changes. But it definitely felt like some of the players, like Michael Dubry's, Dave Kitson's, these guys might not continue playing after this season. So we felt that coming into that summer was going to be a big change for Oxford United. There was going to be players out that needed to be sort of turned over and sort of almost a squad rebuilt again.
You mentioned a few names there that were coming up to contract, and yourself included in that. You've stated so many times on the podcast that you're desperate to stay. You'd still be playing from now, I think, if you could. How was the contract situation dealt with? You've got a new manager that has been, just trying to get his feet under the table, like you said, at an awful time.
Yeah.
And you're kind of going, okay, well, I've got to put some food on the table next season. What's happening?
I think he was keen to sort of just say, look, I'm not talking about anything until the end of the season. I think he was trying to maybe take all that distraction away and just say, look, which I sort of half get, but I think the players found that difficult. Like I say, there's big players in that change room that want to know what's happening, and I think he was keen to just focus on the league, get us. At that point, we were still not a million miles off the playoffs, so it was a strange one. Although the run we'd been on, it showed how well we'd done the first half of the season. After the run we'd been on, we still weren't a million miles off. So yeah, I think that was the sort of main aim. But then obviously the season finished and we were flat from that. But obviously we sort of opened negotiations, and I remember sort of speaking with Gary, and obviously they made an offer that was 30-40% less than what I'd been on, which for me was just came completely out of nowhere. Obviously I was delighted that they wanted to offer me a new deal, but just had no clue as to how that would look. And obviously it was a 1-year deal, which I'd sort of 28, 29, I didn't feel that I was in the realms of getting 1-year deals to get me through. I'd played nearly 50 games a season that season, and for the 6 seasons before, I'd played sort of week in, week out. So
and been top scorer.
Yeah,
for
six
seasons.
Yeah, which just didn't make sense to me really. And obviously I sort of spoke with him, and we had a sort of chat, and I said, like, obviously I'm desperate to stay. Obviously you've seen, I've made it clear since you've been here that I want to stay, but obviously I'm in a situation. I've got a 7-8 month old daughter now. It's not something I can just snap your hand off. It's a hell of a sort of decrease to what I've been on, and only being a 1-year deal. So I remember sort of speaking to Ian Lenigan and trying to really get clarification as to why he was offering me that, and he made it clear that it was nothing to do with him, and he set the budget for Gary, and it's Gary's decision on how that gets divvied out between players. But like I say, it went against everything that Gary had said, that it was all, or Ian's told me what to offer you, I'm just offering what he's told me. So
Everyone passing the buck.
exactly, yeah, and that didn't fill me with a great deal of sort of confidence. And I remember going back to Gary and saying, look, he's obviously said it's your decision, and he was like, no, that's not true. And it just got to a point, it was almost like playground stuff, and I just couldn't believe that obviously the time I'd been there and what I'd done and deals I'd turned down. I've got a guy that I've known for sort of 6 weeks, 7 weeks, that he's basically trying to out me, it felt like, then trying to blame it on the chairman, who I'd known sort of for a year and a half. So I had a little bit more knowledge of him and aware of him, and I just didn't feel like that might be coming from him. It felt like it was coming from Gary, but he didn't want to be sort of honest with me and let me know that. So it got to a point where we were sort of going back and forth, and I'd sort of spoke with my obviously my girlfriend at the time and mum and dad, and said, look, I could probably do a year, just because I want to stay. I'm 1 goal off the record. Obviously it's going to be a rebuild project, and there's stuff we can do and say, look, if I play so many games, I'll get another year or whatever it is. But I could just about do the year, but it would need to be on the same wages I was on. I'd never felt like I was ever sort of the top earner at Oxford. There was players on more than me. I sort of know that for a fact. So it wasn't like I was the sort of top earner, and it was a lot of money. Like they'd give me a pay cut for whatever reason, but it just felt like they were sort of potentially trying to move me on without sort of saying it. They could say, look, we tried to keep him, he didn't want to stay, but in reality, they had put me in a situation that meant I had a big decision to make. And obviously, I think people that listened to the radio interview knew what that meant after leaving and how that felt for me personally. I'd never wanted to leave the football club, but they put me in a situation that pretty much sort of took the decision out of my hands.
Well, it was that, and it's very easy to say we've offered a contract. We've heard it a million times as football fans. Oh, they've offered him a new contract, and he's turned it down. What I think people don't realise, but we've kind of sort of got under the skin a bit of this a little bit more, is that that there is a human who plays football, who has wife and kids, and who needs to think about the future.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, your future's been put in question at the age of 28.
Yeah.
It's almost been, you've been pigeonholed as, well, you get a year, and we all know what happens with a year contracts.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to get another year contract. That's going to be the end of it. And to have,
but this was so close to, like say, only a few years earlier, Swindon were offering me 2 3-year deals. Bristol Rovers were wanting to sign me and offer me a pretty lucrative deal. Bournemouth. Like, I turned down all these clubs, and like say, I turned down because I wanted to stay. And then I know it sort of got, they tried to chuck in things and say, look, if you score 20 goals, we'll give you all the money we're taking away from you. We're basically giving you all back when you score 20 goals. And I was like, yeah, but I don't know what that squad's going to look like. If you're going to rip it apart and start again, the likelihood is I might not score 20. And even if I did have an unbelievable season, I got to 19, you could just stop playing me, and in which case I'll never, ever get that money back. So it was tough. Like I say, I again, sort of looking back, it was a horrible sort of couple of weeks. I know I'd sort of spoke to different clubs, and obviously spoke to Stu, and I think Wimbledon had made contact and stuff about me potentially going there. And at my time in my career and my life, probably travelling in and out of London wasn't something I sort of wanted to do really. And I remember speaking to Stu at Eastleigh, and obviously I'd known him from my time at Oxford, and he was keen to get me down there, and pretty much just said, look, we're whatever you're on, we'll give you that. There's, like I say, we know what you can do. We've got to the conference. We want to kick on, and we want to get back to we want to get into the Football League for the first time. And they had wild plans of new stadiums, and like anyone that knows Stu Donald will know, like he's infectious. Like he's football mad. He obviously went on to Sunderland and was chairman up there. So you can see the level of what this guy wants to do, and where he wanted to take Eastleigh basically was to be a club that could go and challenge Oxford. So I'll say it was definitely something that interested me, but I think the security of a 3-year contract and things like that made such a difference. It put me in a harder situation, almost if they had offered me a year and things like that, it probably would have been harder. But like I say, obviously to have that offer of 3 year, it did sort of, I was fighting against my head saying, look, you know what, this is, you can't really turn it down. It's security, it's near the coast, it's somewhere for the kids to grow up. But my heart was being pulled apart because this is a club that basically I wanted to stay for the rest of my career and see out my time. And then obviously once I'd finished playing, hopefully be part of the coaching staff and, like I say, be a sort of future person at the club for a long time. So it was a really, really tough sort of couple of weeks.
This might sound like quite a hard thing to look back on in hindsight, but you said a lot of that with dealings with Ian, with Gary. You had your own reservations about where things were coming from. You signed for Eastleigh in May after your contract ends, and Gary loses his job in July.
Yeah.
Is there a part of you that's looking at that and thinking, I could still be there right now if things had played out slightly differently just a few months earlier?
Yeah, I think so. Like I say, definitely. I think when I left, and obviously I still followed it, and I think we played Oxford in the pre-season of that season. I was at Eastleigh and things like that, and obviously I was as well. I just remember sort of thinking that summer, like I'd never really got a chance to say goodbye properly. Like I'd sort of, it wasn't like I knew I was leaving. So like that last game, you see like the PK and Barcelona, you get a proper chance to say bye. And I did feel like a little bit that I'd sort of slipped out the back door, and just things like that just sort of really sort of got to me over the time that obviously I was down at Eastleigh now, and I was sort of excited for that challenge, but there was just bits that were like, it just didn't sit right with me. I did feel like I didn't get the proper sort of send off and chance to really thank the fans for what they've given me over the years.
Well, Rich asked me this morning, did you have a testimonial?
I genuinely thought, like, going into this, I was just like, oh yeah, did he? Have I missed it? Did he have one or not? And we were sort of googling. We were like, oh no, you have to either been there 10 years,
or special circumstances. And
like you said, that sort of leaving through, a side door for, we said a number of times, for a club legend, is a very strange. Like, how does that sit with you at the moment? Because you work with Oxford United at the moment, you're still part and parcel of that. But at that time, did you feel like that you were being sort of bumped to that side, and then it's like, okay, that's that then?
Yeah, I think, like I say, but when I left, it was definitely, I did feel like, for whatever reason, I'd been sort of moved on for nothing that I could really put a finger on. Like, say, I'd had injuries with my foot, but I'd still racked up 45, 50 games that season. I'd still scored goals. I just didn't feel like, at that stage of my career, I needed to move on. Like I say, in terms of finances, I wasn't earning stupid money or draining the club of finances. I just thought it was a strange time. It was a strange situation to be moved on the way it was. But then I was back, I think August, September time, I received my 100th shirt, and, like I say, obviously to commemorate the 100 goals I'd scored, and I managed to sort of go onto the pitch and sort of half say goodbye, but it was already, I'd left, so it felt sort of a little bit odd doing it that way. But I'll say, obviously, back there now is unbelievable. I still, like I was saying to Teddy, like, if we're in at 12:30 on a match day, I'm not in the club before 1 o'clock. I'll stop and speak to the fans and catch up with them, because I say they're a huge part of my time there. They gave me unbelievable support throughout that time. Obviously, the times where I was out of the squad and obviously dealing with things that were going on, and obviously all the highs as well. They were a big part of it. So obviously back there on a match day now is fantastic. But like I say, looking back, it's one of those things you think sort of in the back of your head, given your time again, would you just sort of bite your lip and just take that year? And like you say, who knows what could have been, and I could still be there now, and obviously hopefully in the 200 goals and breaking all sorts of records. But it's one of those things, like I say, you just got to sort of live with it and move on.
Well, I mean, that's a very poignant part, I think, to wrap up this episode of the James Constable Podcast. I wanted to say, is there anything that you wanted to say to the fans listening? Because we've done this podcast. We've done this podcast for the people that have cheered your name, like you said, that have stuck by you thick and thin, that still stop you outside the ground and have a chat and recall those memories, and oh, I remember you with that header and you celebrated in front of me, and that was 10 years ago, and what have you. Is there anything you want to say to kind of wrap up this episode?
Yeah, like I say, I think without this whole podcast, like it's a lot of the times we've spoke, it's been about the fans, it's been about their journey, it's been about like them supporting the club, Gateshead, and all over the country following us guys that, like say, season after season, we obviously after getting promoted, sort of getting so near and then letting them down. It was, like I say, they never once sort of veered away from following us, supporting us. So I think for me it was, and obviously my journey, obviously being there from when I was to then leaving and not getting a proper chance to thank them and be able to sort of really just say, thanks for everything they did for me through that time, was, say, even now I look back and I think like it was tough. Like I wish I'd just got the chance. I look at the Mansfield game and that was almost, like say, my way of doing it without knowing that would be my sort of last season. But really just thanks to them, and they made my journey through my time at Oxford United so much more enjoyable. And like say, even now that I can still speak to them and they sort of remind me of goals I scored in games where I'd got booked or whatever it is, that you can't help but smile. And like say, I loved every minute of being there. And like say, I wouldn't, obviously apart from maybe leaving, I wouldn't change anything about it, but also clear up I think a lot of the fans are probably in two minds that I left because of money or things like that, which, like I say, throughout my career, I've showed it time after time. It was never about money. It was, like I say, I was happy to stay what I was on, which was comfortable. I'd had chances to leave on for a lot more money, but for me, I wanted to stay. But like I say, that the pay cut, the year deal was just, it made it impossible. And like I say, but looking back, it's one of those that maybe sort of in the back of your mind, if I'd known how it would have played at Eastleigh, that I would have just stayed. But it's so difficult. I was expecting us to do really well and get in the Football League. So it was, but yeah, given my time again, I would have, obviously, how it did go, I would have stayed and like I say, hopefully gone on and broke the record officially and hopefully still be there now.
Well, I think that's a brilliant way to wrap up. I think Teddy's got a few little summary points just to remind everyone about James Constable.
Well, as we said, I think you've been, across this journey of these 6 episodes, you've been unbelievably humble about the things you did manage to achieve at Oxford. And I think just to sum it up, joining in 2008, there for 6 years, playing 280 games and leading the boys out 65 times as captain of those, captaining them to a playoff win at Wembley, being the top scorer overall for 6 consecutive seasons. And I think in our book, certainly, those 3 goals at Chester certainly count in our mind.
Yeah, they should still count, yeah.
So officially, Oxford's second top scorer with 106. But I speak for Rich and I, and everyone listening who's listened to this journey, I think we all, in our minds, know that you scored 109, certified Oxford United legend.
Well, I think the only thing to remain to do is have a little cheers to James and say,
cheers, guys.
Oxford United legend, thank you so much for listening to this journey. Thank you to James for laying so many incredible things on the line. We've all learned, as fans of Oxford United, some incredible things on this journey. It's been an absolute roller coaster and an absolute pleasure. Big thank you to Statman Ted, who's been keeping us on the straight and narrows. You didn't mention the red cards and the yellow cards.
No, I thought it'd be nice to say that.
You can't do it on the last one. You can't leave that out.
We're going to be back with more from the James Constable podcast very, very soon indeed. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share. As always, a big thank you to the White House here in Oxford, Tap Social, for housing us and putting us up and giving us fantastic beer to drink throughout this. And also a big thank you to Get Radio as well for putting this all together.
You've been listening to the James Constable podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. We're going to have a new episode dropping every Tuesday. This has been powered by Get Radio, Oxfordshire's local radio station. Head to getradio.co.uk for more updates and details.